Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the Dying Your Way podcast. Leigh-Anne Fox is going to be our guest today, and it's going to be a real interesting conversation because one of the pieces that we have in the Dying Your Way podcast or Dying Your Way program, is how important it is to talk about planning a funeral. And this is a female funeral director from New Zealand. So New Zealand, for those of you that haven't been there, it's just the most beautiful country. And she's in the South Island. So it's just like the most beautiful part of the most beautiful country. And there's a very strong interconnectedness with the Maori culture. And we'll be talking about that culture and their funeral practices. But also, I just think it's very interesting that there's a woman that is like has her own funeral home, and in really a male-dominated industry. And when I found out about Leigh-Anne, I just really wanted to spend some time on the podcast focusing on preparing for a funeral. And it certainly does make it easier for your loved ones when you've thought that through ahead of time. So instead of me rattling on about it, let's cut to the chase and let's meet Leigh-Anne, and I'll let her tell you a little bit about her backstory. So here is Leigh-Anne Fox. You can get it. There we go.
Hi.
Hi, Leigh-Anne. How are you today?
Hi, Claire. Good, thank you. Good.
Yeah. So where are you exactly in New Zealand?
Oh, look, we're way down south in Cromwell, just on the outskirts of Queenstown in the far south.
So when we were traveling, my husband is a Kiwi. And so and his brother lives in Nelson. So we did get to the South Island, and we did get to, do you know where Mount Hutt is?
I most certainly do.
Yeah,
Yes.
So that's as far south about as we got. So
right, a few more hours south than that.
Yeah. Well,
right down the bottom.
And we love your prime minister.
Thank you.
He's the best. Well, tell us a little bit about just your backstory and how you came to be in a male-dominated funeral industry. I mean, that may not be the case in New Zealand, but it certainly is in the United States. No, that's okay. My father was a funeral director for 65 years. So, I've very high respect and regard for the people that do this as their life work. And I just love to know more about you and how you came to be a funeral director.
Well, from a very young age, it really was something I was always quite fascinated in, not just funerals as such, but more the rituals and the spiritual side of things. In those days, we had the encyclopedias. Grandma had the Britannica encyclopedias, and I'd been through all those encyclopedias and cut out things about embalming and spiritual rituals and things like that. So I always knew that I was called to do something in this field of work. But getting my foot in the door was incredibly hard. And it wasn't until, 7 or 8 years ago that a position came available here in Cromwell in Central Otago. And I dropped everything and took it. And it was hard work. It was the hardest job I've ever done. And I would be going to work crying and coming home crying because I was so exhausted.
Was it a mental exhaustion or emotional or physical exhaustion, or
all three? All three can take its toll, and they threw me in the deep end, but I learned quickly and I learned efficiently, and so it was in hindsight probably the best thing. And I hung on to that position, and then after COVID, I was made redundant after the first COVID lockdown a couple of years ago.
What do you mean redundant? That there was someone else, they didn't need so many people, they needed to let people go?
Well, I think they thought they'd do a restructure at the time, and we all got offered our positions back, but I saw that as my opportunity to do things the way I want to do them better for families, and it was always my intention to do that. So here I am. And we've had Kotuku now for 18 months, and it's been very successful in our region. People like it. It's great for client families. It's been a really fun journey so far.
So tell me the name again and say it slow, because we've got a lot of American listeners, and what that name actually means and why you chose that as your symbol.
It's a really special name to me. I descend from the Ngaitahu iwi in the lower South Island, from the Maori culture, and the Kotuku is the native white heron of New Zealand, and it's only found 2 hours west of us here in Cromwell, on the west coast of the lower South Island. And the beautiful thing about the Kotuku is it's said to accompany the spirit of the deceased right up to the top of the North Island, and then takes the spirit, it cares for the spirit as it takes it back to its ancestral land, wherever that may be, and just accompanies the soul. So it's a really special meaning and name for us down here. Yeah.
That's beautiful. So that's part of your heritage. How has I mean, I have a friend who's Maori, and he's really spent a lot of time with Dying Your Way, and boy, the information he's given me about the traditions and the cultures that are so different but so honoring that the Maoris have. Could you tell us a little bit about what a Maori funeral would look like?
I guess being Maori myself, the main thing that we tend to come together as a whānau, as a family. You know, as soon as we lose one of our loved ones, we gather. And we gather for a good amount of time, a week, you know, and we like to have our deceased home with us. And we mourn, you know, we laugh and we cry and we spend time together supporting each other. And so that's a modern day Southern Maori family these days. We like to bring our deceased home. We like to spend the time grieving and honouring our deceased. And our ancestors tend to walk beside us as we go forward. I know in this job particularly, I'm often calling on the strength of my grandmother or my great-grandmothers to help guide me and support me and give me the strength that I need to go on. Some stories are pretty sad, obviously, and I just know I have a long ancestry of very strong women behind me, helping me every day.
That's so beautiful.
That's how I operate, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's something that the typical Western culture has really lost, that connection with the land and certainly with the ancestors. That is, it's easy to adopt the cultures of other heritages that do it better, you know, and
I think the Maori do it very well.
Yeah.
I really do. And I mean, I'm married to an Englishman, a man from English descent, and how they do it is completely different, but it still works for them. I really think it's just what you're raised with, I think, and what your family need. It's their traditions.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it used to be more like that. I know that there's a history that you're probably aware of with embalming, and that started in the Civil War, actually, in the United States. And it was a way to preserve the body so it could get home to the family, so they could, you know, have the funeral and stuff at home. And that the way it was done then was that everybody had a parlor, and it's where they put their nice little tchotchkes and furniture and things. And that was where the deceased was laid out. And it was
in the homes, yes.
In the homes. And then after it started become a convention to have a funeral director that was like overseeing all of that, and they started having funeral parlors where viewings and the services would happen. And that's when the parlors became living rooms, which is what we call it in the United States, are living rooms. And I just think that's a bit of a fun fact. But yeah, I mean, I think it's only been the last maybe 150 years that we've outsourced taking care of our loved ones to others.
But we're getting back to that very slowly. Well, particularly here in New Zealand, there's families that are wanting to dress their deceased. They'll come into the funeral home here and they'll want to dress, they'll want to do their hair, they'll want to spend time with them. I see us slowly going back to ourselves caring for our deceased. It has been a very secretive industry for the last 100 years.
Why so? I mean, how so
well,
and why?
Well, I guess it's been a male-dominated industry. Nobody's really wanted to know what happens behind closed doors. I guess with colonisation in New Zealand, a lot of English people just wanted it out of their hands and into somebody else's. But I think we're slowly coming around to where we're wanting to do more and more for our own loved ones, with the guidance, of course, of a funeral director.
Yeah.
People are getting more comfortable. We're talking about it more. It's becoming more open.
Yeah.
Yes.
I love the idea of, and I've seen some beautiful depictions of it on YouTube videos about home funerals. Do you support people doing home funerals? Well, I guess that's what a Maori funeral is a home funeral.
Look, I mean, every family is different. Some have very strong spiritual beliefs, and in that case, a church is a lovely way to honour and farewell their loved one. But we are seeing more and more families having the garden service in a vineyard. I mean, we're surrounded with vineyards here. So having memorial services and things in gardens and vineyards or orchards is very popular on the top of mountains. It's really, it's what suits the person. It doesn't need to be set in concrete what we do anymore. People can do what they like, and it's working. We had a beautiful service at the Wanaka lakefront a wee while ago, which was just beautiful. Yeah.
No, I mean, I think that's you listening to your community and to your customers, for lack of a better word, and giving them what they want and what they need to go through a really difficult time. But there are people, I mean, I'm not saying this across the board, but there is some resistance to that in some places, and it's very that a funeral home in some cases won't take a body unless it's embalmed. So you don't necessarily embalm, is that correct?
No, I don't embalm. I do take each case by case. If we've got a family who, it's 3 days between their death and their funeral, and they're going to stay with me for 2 days and go home overnight on the last night, I don't need to embalm that person. If that person's going to stay in my care, they're fine. I'm with them. I'm keeping an eye on them. Nothing's going to go wrong. The times I do embalm there is instances when I do embalm, and that's when there's 7 days between a funeral and death. We do live in a rather warm climate here in the summer and a cool climate in the winter, so I need to be aware of the weather and whether they're going home and for how long for. And obviously, if they're going from the South Island to the North Island or being repatriated at all. So I do it case by case, but I think embalming is overused for families in a small community like mine. I can take very good care of our deceased here without having to do that if I don't need to.
So from a practical point of view, I mean, is that because you have a room that's cooler in temperature, or you have ice blankets?
I have a cooling system in my mortuary, which brings it down to 2 to 4 degrees, which is great. It stabilizes our deceased and keeps them well for that amount of time.
And what are some of you said an echo option that you have on your website, by the way, is beautiful. It's a very beautiful website. So you mentioned echo options. What exactly do you mean by that?
Well, I think New Zealand's getting on board more and more with eco burial sites around the country.
Mm.
It's still a relatively harder option to do in our region because our closest burial site is in Dunedin. But there's lots of options now with greener caskets. There's just lots of ways to make the funeral easier on the environment. I mean, plastic handles and nameplates for one. I mean, they can go, you know, they can go. There's absolutely no need for them.
Yeah.
But once again, it's up to every family, and some families are really all about leaving as little a footprint as they possibly can, while others, you know, just want to, they'd like it the funeral with, you know, the way it is done. But
this is like elementary question, so I don't mean to, because I really think the listeners would want to know too. So if you have a loved one that's died, they haven't been embalmed, but they've been cared for by the family with your support and transportation and all of the things that are involved, they would go to a traditional cemetery in a eco-friendly casket. I mean, where would they be if Dunedin is the closest green burial site? Are they able to go into the regular cemetery?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So they go, and people are quite aware of that when they're burying their loved ones these days too. They want to know what's going to break down and how long it's going to take to break down. And I get those questions quite often. So obviously keeping the trying not to embalm if we don't need to, and looking at what the casket's made of. I mean, there is eco-friendly options out there for caskets, such as your wicker, things like that. They're all things that help, you know, and we're all here to do the little things that help. If we can all make a small change, you know, it's better for everyone in the long run.
And in the normal cemeteries, not the green burial cemeteries, they wouldn't require this, but in the normal cemeteries, does the customer have to pay for the concrete vault to hold up so it doesn't, you know, for the mowing? They have concrete vaults just for mowing purposes.
No, we have a concrete what do you call them, along the top there, where the headstone will sit. That's the only concrete we have.
Oh, okay.
Is that what you're talking about? The rest of them is a grass.
So they have in the United States, and probably here too, but I know in the United States they have perpetual care cemeteries. And one of the things that when a customer comes in, that is part of their pricing structure, things that are required in this perpetual cemetery are concrete vaults, that the casket is entombed in the concrete structure, and the purpose of that concrete structure, which is very non-green, is so they can mow, so the ground doesn't sink. You know, it just keeps the structure of the ground up.
Right.
And Terry and I actually went to a cemetery in Boulder, Colorado, and they were listed as a green cemetery, but still people had to have the concrete vault. And the only reason why they could call it a green cemetery is that the bottom of the concrete wasn't there. So the casket or the shroud, you know, were laid directly on the earth. But it's there for mowing.
Right. No, ours you were right into the earth here in New Zealand. Yeah. We don't have the concrete. And the grass isn't even. You've got to be careful in your high heels. Yeah.
One of my favorite Netflix shows is the Casketeer. I'm sure you're familiar with it.
I am. It's a great show.
Oh God, it's kind of funny, and of course and
we've got to give credit to those guys for once again just wedging the door open and giving people an opportunity to talk. They have got people talking about the death industry and dying and all those really important things that we've avoided for so long.
Yeah.
And they've brought humour to the industry, which when you're a funeral director, you need.
Oh my gosh.
Otherwise, life can get pretty gloomy.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because, like I said, my dad had, been doing that for most of his working life. And as a child growing up, I remember it was never discussed at home. I was always being protected. It was interesting how, I don't know if death phobic is the word, but there was a real sense of protecting, particularly the women folk, about having to.
Well, we're seeing changes in that now, even with children. Children are able to spend time around the casket and things like that. Whereas when I was a little girl, I remember the day my great-grandmother died, but I wasn't truly involved. Whereas my Maori great-grandmother, I was very involved, but I was kept distant from my other great-grandmother, just, I guess, in case psychologically I couldn't deal with it. But me being me was quite obsessed with the day. I wanted to know every little detail. Yeah.
Yeah. Terry's mom died in Gisborne.
Right.
And he flew back from New York to go to the funeral. And there are just some lovely videos and pictures of this very large family with a lot of small kids. And they have a pine coffin, and all of the kids are like, using markers and doing artwork on the coffin and writing notes and, and then she went on to a crematorium. It was lovely just to see that kind of togetherness of the family and the inclusion that the children.
Are they from Maori descent as well?
No, Norwegian and English. Yeah. Because
often the Maori will really decorate their caskets and spend time with the casket as well, which is lovely to see.
Yeah. Well, that's what I love about the New Zealand, is how the Maori culture is just so embedded into everything about it, and the even Jacinda Ardern was like giving a speech at Harvard, a commencement speech, and she's wearing the Maori, traditional Maori cape as she's giving a commencement speech at Harvard. It's just like, that's what you do.
Well, I guess we have pride in our culture and our history as a country. So that helps us. And we've come such a long way, and we've done it well.
Very well. Very well.
So we're proud of that as a nation.
Yeah. So typically now, do you see what types of funerals versus cremations? What do you see mostly there?
Cremations is definitely, burial's more of a traditional option. Of course, we're all waiting and seeing about the water cremation that they're working on now, which seems to be a more eco-friendly way of doing it.
Could you describe that to our listeners?
Well, I'm not a professional in it, but I have just been following what's going on, and it's basically the flesh is washed off the bones, and the bones are left to dry out. And then made into the ashes, which is, cremation is not eco-friendly. And so we do need to look at ways of rectifying that. I mean, even just the fillings in people's teeth is quite an issue for the atmosphere.
And the toxic gases that are released from it.
That's right. Yeah, so we really need to look at ways of doing that. And so there is a lady in Christchurch, actually, who would be worth talking to, who's working on the water cremation option. Of course, with being, Maori are very vested in their water. So there's cultural sensitivities that we need to work around and things like that, but it's looking good and it's looking interesting. So we're looking forward to seeing that going forward.
So what are some of the I mean, I'm sure you face so many different scenarios, but what is the impact on a family when they're dealing with, a tragic time in their life, whether it's expected or not expected? It's sad. And when you're working with a family that has prepared versus a family that's unprepared, what are they going through if they're not prepared?
Well, shock for a start. They don't know where to begin. They don't know where their life all of a sudden has been turned around. It's just fear of the unknown. And there are families out there that don't talk about it. They don't know, and it can be a real conflict in families if mum's never talked about dying and all of a sudden she dies out of the blue, and one child wants to bury and one wants to cremate, but they both want to do what's right for mum, and mum never told them. That can be a real stress on family members that are left behind. Whereas if it was spoken about, I'd like buried in the Cromwell cemetery, or I'd like cremated, my ashes is scattered at Mount Roy or whatever. But if people know, then that's kind of a weight off their shoulders, I guess. It's one less thing they have to think about, because they're thinking about ringing Auntie Mavis and they're, worried about what kind of casket to get. But if there's been a conversation around death before, and it can be as casual or as formal as you like, we have these fabulous little booklets and we give them to our people who ask, and they're also available on our website to download, actually. And they just trigger questions, and they're not hard questions. They're just, have a wee think about things, what would you like? Is there something specific, or are you happy to leave it up to the living? And I always say to the living that are left behind, if the decisions don't sit well with you that the deceased has made, funerals are for the living. The deceased have moved on, so it's got to bring you peace and comfort. Yeah, so ultimately the decision is left behind for the living, but if the deceased can give their family some kind of guidance, it's got to help.
Well, and coming into that kind of situation, knowing what your budget is, even, I mean, I think a lot of people can, because of societal pressures, spend more than maybe they can really afford, or they don't know if money's been set aside, somewhere that they have no idea that money even exists.
And just letting family know that there is or there isn't can be a huge relief off people's minds. It really can. It's I think it's a really important thing to think about at any age.
There's a program that Dying Your Way has, that modules that we take people through from diagnosis to aftercare. And then they fill out an individualized end of life plan. And part of that is funeral planning. And then they're really encouraged to not only keep it with their important papers, but to share it and communicate it with people before the fact, so people aren't walking in, to that situation totally blindsided, about.
And often it will bring the family comfort, even just coming to meet me and knowing what my process is going to be when the time comes. If somebody's terminally ill, I'll quite often, spend an hour with family and show them where their loved one will be coming, and tell them what my process is going to be, or how it's going to unfold that day. So there's no surprises for them.
Yeah, that's really lovely. And
another thing that there seems to be a bit of trouble with too is if there's a generation where, say, I died by mistake and my children are here, but my mother's gone as well. These children might not necessarily know my mother's maiden name, or that you've just got to be careful to connect the dots too, and leave that information for generation, the generation below, that they know your mother's maiden name, that they know your father's occupation, they know where you were born, what age you were when you got married, all those wee things, because we need those to register the death.
You need that for the death certificate, right?
But often if there's a break in the generations, or we'll say I die and my children are having to handle my mother's funeral, that's where I run into problems. They won't know my mother's maiden name. you know. So it's quite important just to keep those details, or people aware of those details in the family.
I hadn't even thought of that. Yeah, that's so important.
Mm.
Well, I love that, you have these eco options and that there is a female presence in the industry. I just, again, the men that I know that are in the industry have a high emotional intelligence, EQ. They do.
They do.
Empathy comes with a job, and I'm glad to hear that you do things to protect yourself, so you have your own life and your own sense of humor that you
I
balance.
also have a grandson on the way, which is just great news, so that's very exciting for me.
Wow, that is exciting.
Yeah.
That is exciting. Well, I love what you're doing. I really do.
Thank you.
Is there anything else that you want to share with this audience about the importance of having a ritual, having a ceremony?
Look, I just
there are people
think
that don't even think it's important.
Well, lots of people will say to me, "Oh, look, don't worry about Dad. We'll just do a direct cremation. He didn't really want anything fussy," and that's okay if that's the way Dad was. But these people, they touch many people's lives, and funerals are there for the shopkeeper to come and pay their respects, for the lady that popped in once a week and dropped off his vegetables. There's lots and lots of people. To me, funerals are times to heal and grieve and support each other. And sometimes you just don't realize the people that you connect with, or you support, or you give something to throughout your own life. And a lot of people underestimate that. It's quite important to stop and recognize the person when they die and pay your respects.
Well, it brings the village together, and the people that are left behind get to. Oh, I lost you.
I'm coming back, I think.
You are. The people that are left behind are kind of they're now cast in new roles that they almost need to be introduced to society as now. Here I am, the widow. Here I am, the widower. And it's a way of bringing the community together so they can.
And everybody can put themselves in a position of losing a mother or a husband or a child. We all have empathy for that. And although it hasn't happened to all of us, we're grateful it hasn't most of the time. So we have that empathy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I am just so happy that we got a chance to talk. And yeah, there's just so much depth and texture to the Maori culture, and I wish I could show people how actually beautiful your country is and your culture, and
it is worth a visit.
Yeah, maybe just watch the Casketeer or Google a few Maori funerals. It's really lovely.
But we're also rich in Chinese funerals and Tongan funerals and Samoan funerals, and we have a lot of that here too. So we're culturally loaded here. We're very lucky. Yeah. And they're all different. Everybody does them different ways. So it's really lovely. No two funerals are alike in the South.
I bet that's true. Yeah, there is a lot of diversity in New Zealand. That's great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Leigh-Anne. I really appreciate your time talking to us, and I know our listeners appreciate it. And if people want to find out more about your funeral home and your services, tell us how they can reach you.
Or you can visit our website on www.Kotuku Funerals, which is KOTUKU funerals.co.nz, or email us. Yeah.
And we'll have a link below so people can follow you there. And do download that free book, for funeral planning. I looked at it. It's wonderful.
Yes.
Very easy to go through.
Yeah. Lovely.
Okay. Well, lovely to meet you, Leigh-Anne. You have a wonderful
Thank you, Claire.
rest of your day.
I will. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye.